She leaned back on the chair, crossed her legs with that smug little smile, and looked me dead in the eye when she said those two words. "You get nothing." I sat there quietly, feeling the weight of everything I had built, everything I had poured my life into, settle like a stone in my chest. She thought it was over for me, that those words would break me, but she had no idea that behind all the silence, I had something she would never see coming. My husband left me a secret she couldn't touch, and when the truth came out, it wasn't me who broke. It was her. Thank you so much for watching my story. It means more than you can imagine, and I would truly love to know where you're watching from. So please share it in the comments below, because hearing where people are listening from always warms my heart. My name is Clara, and I live in Ohio, a place where the wind feels a little softer in the evenings and where my husband and I built everything we had from the ground up. I'm not a woman who grew up with riches or a silver spoon in my mouth, no. I was raised with nothing but stubborn hope and the kind of hands that know how to work hard. I still remember when we had dust in our shoes and calluses on our palms, when the dream of owning even a small patch of land felt like a faraway story meant for other people. My husband and I started with one single truck and a toolbox that had more rust than shine, and little by little, we laid the bricks of what would one day become an empire. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy, but we had each other, and every step forward meant something. We built a construction business with sweat, trust, and sleepless nights spent trying to figure out how to make tomorrow work. There were nights we couldn't even afford proper dinner, but we kept our heads up, holding on to each other like two people who had promised the world nothing but hard work. When the first house was finished, I remember standing in the cold wind with my hands shaking from exhaustion, and yet my heart was full. It wasn't just a house, it was proof that we could take nothing and turn it into something solid, something that would last. That feeling carried us through years of work, through ups and downs, through moments that would have broken many. Together we turned one house into 10 into hundreds, and from there into something bigger than I ever dreamed I would touch in this lifetime. We built a real estate empire that carried our name like a badge of honor. All of that became the foundation of my life, the thing I thought would keep my family together long after he was gone. I thought loyalty would live in those walls. I thought love would echo through every window we installed. I thought family would always mean protection and respect. But the truth I would come to learn is that sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who quietly build their own plans behind your back. I didn't see it at first because I trusted too deeply and I loved without looking for shadows. But shadows were there, quiet ones, growing ones, and eventually they came for everything I built with my bare hands. I still remember the day I first met her. The woman who would one day look me straight in the eye and tell me I would get nothing. She had a smile that seemed sweet from a distance, soft voice, polished manners, and a way of holding herself like someone who already believed she belonged in the center of every room. My son loved her from the very beginning. I could see it in the way his eyes lit up when she walked through the door, the way he hung on to every word she spoke. And because I loved him, I opened my heart to her too. I welcomed her into my family, into the home I had spent a lifetime building, and I treated her not like a stranger, but like someone I believed would become part of something sacred. At that time, my husband was still alive, though age was beginning to press its quiet weight on his shoulders. We were slowing down, not because the fire in us had faded, but because we trusted the next generation to carry the torch we had held for so long. I thought my son would protect what we built, nurture it with the same love and sweat that went into its foundation. But slowly, after she came into the picture, I started to feel something in the air shift. Conversations that used to be warm turned quiet. Glances began to hold meanings I couldn't quite understand. And the laughter that used to echo through the house didn't sound the same anymore. She was careful with how she did it. Nothing loud, nothing obvious. Just little seeds planted here and there, whispers wrapped in smiles, making herself look like the perfect partner, while slowly wrapping herself around everything we had worked for. I would catch her eyes lingering on things that weren't hers, running her hands along furniture she didn't buy, speaking about the company as if she already owned a piece of it. And my son, the boy I raised through storms and sacrifice, began to see her world more than mine. He started to believe her when she painted herself as the one who could keep things running smoothly, the one who understood how to protect the future. I didn't want to believe that she was slowly pulling him away from me, but my heart knew something wasn't right. It was in the way she spoke about decisions that had never been hers to make. The way she talked about my home as if it was already passing through her hands. It was in the way she smiled too sweetly, too carefully, as if every gesture carried a hidden plan. Still, I stayed quiet, telling myself that love could hold a family together even when things began to shift. I didn't know that behind those carefully painted smiles, she was already preparing the ground to take everything from me. And I, holding on to the belief that family would never betray me, kept my guard down when I should have built my walls higher. The day everything truly began to change is one I can still see clearly, like a photograph burned into the back of my mind. My husband had passed not too long before, and the house that used to feel full of strength suddenly carried a silence that settled on my shoulders like a heavy coat. I thought my son would lean on me as much as I leaned on him, that together we would honor the man who built this life with me. But instead, I noticed her stepping closer, not with comfort but with quiet calculation hiding behind a soft voice and well-timed tears. She said she wanted to help me, that she wanted to make sure I wouldn't have to worry about a single thing for the rest of my life. She said everything with a warm smile and hands folded like she carried my best interests in her heart. But her eyes were colder than her words. She came to me one afternoon with my son by her side, both of them sitting across from me at the old oak table that had seen every celebration and every sleepless night of our lives. They talked gently, careful not to sound like they were pushing, but every word they spoke was designed to guide me exactly where they wanted. They told me it would be best to sign temporary control of the estate over to them, that it was only to make sure everything stayed organized, that it would take pressure off me. She reached across the table, touched my hand as if she was offering love, but what she was really offering was a rope she intended to tighten later. My son said he just wanted to protect me, but I could feel something hidden behind the softness of his voice, something I didn't have the courage to name that day. The paper sat on the table between us, thin and white, looking so small for something that held so much power. I remember staring at it, my heart beat loud in my ears, my hands resting still in my lap. I thought about the life we built, about the first wall I ever helped my husband raise, about the dirt under our nails and the way we used to fall asleep proud even when the world gave us nothing. I thought about the promises we made to each other, the ones built into every stone of that company, that house, that land. But more than anything, I thought about my son, about the little boy who used to fall asleep on my lap while I whispered prayers for a future where he would never know the kind of hunger I once knew. And so, against the warning pressing hard in my chest, I picked up the pen. My fingers shook slightly, but I smiled weakly, convincing myself I was doing the right thing, that family would never betray me. I signed the papers, slid them across the table, and watched her face light up with the kind of joy that didn't belong in a moment like that. My son hugged me, told me it was going to be okay, and she stood beside him with her hand resting on his arm like she had just won a quiet battle. What I didn't know then was that the moment that pen touched the paper, everything I had ever worked for had been placed in their hands, and the home that once belonged to me was already beginning to slip away. The changes didn't happen all at once. They came in quiet pieces, so small at first that I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. One morning I woke up, and the house felt different. Not because anything had moved, but because everything around me no longer belonged to me. The walls that once held the sound of my laughter now carried her voice, and the hallways that once echoed with my footsteps now answered to hers. I started to notice decisions being made without me, keys that used to hang by the door gone from their hooks, workers who used to come to me for answers now waiting for her permission. It was subtle, calculated, like watching someone rearrange a life you built while smiling as if nothing was happening. They began to handle the accounts, the company decisions, even my personal bills, telling me I didn't have to worry anymore, telling me it was all for my peace of mind. At first, I tried to trust it because I wanted to believe that what we shared as a family meant something. But every time I asked a question, I was met with soft laughs and quick excuses. Like I had become an old woman they were humoring, not the woman who laid the foundation of everything they stood on. I started to feel like a guest in my own life, living inside walls that no longer heard my voice. Then came the day that I walked into my office, the one room where I used to keep every plan, every record, every reminder of the years of sweat and sacrifice. My nameplate was gone from the desk, the files had been moved, and sitting in my chair was her. She looked at me with that polished smile, the one that always meant more than it showed, and she said she was just helping me stay organized. She said it so sweetly, but what I heard was the quiet sound of someone closing a door behind me. Not long after that, the accounts began to shrink. I asked questions and was told not to worry. I asked to see statements, and they told me everything was being handled. I had spent decades making sure there was always enough, and suddenly I was being treated like I couldn't understand my own legacy. My name started disappearing from papers, my signature no longer required, my voice slowly erased from the places it once built. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror in the guest room they had moved me into, staring at a reflection that felt like a stranger, asking myself how everything I owned could vanish so quietly while I was still standing here breathing. The night they read the will, I sat at the edge of the room, not at the head of the table where I once sat beside my husband, but at a small corner where they placed me like a visitor. When they spoke, they skipped my name as if I had never existed. And then she turned her head, tilted it slightly with that satisfied smile, and said the words that carved themselves into me. "You get nothing." I didn't scream, I didn't break. I just stared at her, feeling something inside me harden, not into anger but into quiet fire. She thought she had taken it all. She thought those papers, those numbers, those walls meant she had won. But she didn't know the story wasn't finished. She didn't know that I carried a secret she couldn't touch, one my husband left for me, long before she ever walked into this house. And in that moment, while she smiled, I already knew the day would come when her smile would be the first thing to disappear. After that night, I sat alone in the small guest house they had pushed me into, surrounded by furniture that didn't carry a single piece of my soul. The air felt still, like the kind of silence that has weight. I thought about everything I had given to build this life. About the mornings when I woke up before sunrise to pack lunches and head to construction sites. About the nights when my husband and I stayed up counting every cent, trying to make sure there would be enough for tomorrow. I thought about the way she said those words. "You get nothing." Like my entire existence was something she could erase with just her mouth. But she didn't know me. She didn't know the woman I was before all this, the woman who built empires out of dirt. She saw my silence and thought it was weakness, but it was the sound of something dangerous beginning to stir inside me. My husband was not a man who trusted easily, and long before his last breath, he had planned carefully. He knew that wealth could turn family into strangers, that love could change in the face of power, and that some smiles could hide intentions that take years to reveal. A long time ago, on a night when the company was just beginning to grow, he told me that if anything ever happened to him, there was only one person I should call. That man had stood by him from the very beginning, a lawyer who didn't just hold papers but knew every line of our story, a man who kept quiet because loyalty didn't need to shout. I reached for the old phone on the nightstand, the same one my husband once used to make late-night business calls. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the storm of emotions that had been sitting too long inside me. When his voice came through the line, steady and warm, I didn't have to explain much. He already knew something had gone wrong. We arranged to meet quietly, away from the house that no longer felt like mine, away from the eyes that watched everything I did. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground beneath my feet start to steady. When I met him, He placed his hand over mine the same way my husband once did when he wanted to remind me that everything would be all right. He opened an old leather folder, the edges worn with time, and inside it was the thing that would change everything. It wasn't just paper. It was power wrapped in truth. It was the will my husband had signed and sealed before any of this betrayal ever touched our doorstep. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Everything is exactly where it should be." I felt something sharp loosen inside my chest, something that had been choking me since the day I signed those temporary papers. In that moment, I realized that all their smiles, their little plans, their whispers meant nothing. They thought they were playing with an old woman who was alone. They didn't know I was walking with the memory of a man who built as hard as I did. A man who didn't just trust love, he prepared for the day love might turn cold. The ally I needed was already waiting. And that was the moment I stopped feeling like a woman who had lost everything. I began to feel like a woman who was about to take it all back. That night, when I returned to the guest house, I didn't feel the same way I had felt before. The walls didn't close in on me anymore, and the silence no longer felt like a weight sitting on my chest. For the first time in a long while, I sat on that small chair by the window with my hands folded in my lap, and instead of thinking about everything they had taken from me, I began to think about everything they were about to lose. I thought about the day my husband handed me that small brown envelope, about how he said that not all battles are fought with loud voices, some are won in silence with a single piece of truth. Back then, I didn't understand fully what he meant, but now it was clear. He had built protection for me before the storm ever came. I picked up the phone again, not with trembling fingers this time, but with a steady grip. I called the lawyer and told him I was ready. We set the meeting for the end of the week. He told me not to worry, to let them feel as though everything was still in their control. That advice sank into me deeply, because I finally understood the power of letting people show their greed before letting the truth crush it. Every day leading to that meeting, I walked around the house they had pushed me out of, not as a woman who had been defeated, but as someone walking through her own kingdom, just waiting for the crown to be placed back where it belonged. I watched her, too. The way she moved around the main house like she owned every corner of it. She spoke to people with authority that was never hers, and she laughed like the world had already handed her everything she ever wanted. She wore her new power like a necklace she thought could never be taken away, blind to the fact that it was borrowed, and borrowed things have a way of being returned. She was so sure, so certain, that when I passed by her, she didn't even bother to hide her smug little looks anymore. She thought I was too old, too tired, too broken to fight back. What she didn't see was the quiet storm already gathering behind my silence. The morning of the meeting, I sat at the mirror brushing my hair slowly, looking at my own reflection, seeing not the woman they tried to make small, but the woman who built everything they were trying to claim. I told myself that I had survived harder days than this, that I had walked through real storms and never bowed my head. I reminded myself of the woman who stood on cold concrete with dirt on her hands, building walls when the world gave her nothing. That woman was still here, sitting in that chair. She had just been quiet for a while, but she wasn't gone. By the time I left the guest house that day, my steps felt steady and my heart was no longer heavy. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to explain. The truth was already written, waiting in the hands of someone who would speak it for me. She had taken my money, my home, my name from the walls, but she couldn't take the foundation beneath her feet, because that foundation was me. And I was about to remind her exactly who built it. When the day of the meeting finally came, the sky was gray and heavy, the kind of weather that makes the world quiet before something big happens. I walked into that room slowly, not because I was weak, but because I wanted every single step I took to remind them that I was not a guest in that room. I was the woman who built the ground they were standing on. She was already there when I entered, sitting at the long polished table like a queen who thought her crown was safe, with my son beside her, quiet but still caught in the web she had spun around him. Her smile was sharp, the kind of smile people wear when they believe they've already won. She crossed her legs, tilted her head, and gave me that look, the same one she gave me the night she said I would get nothing. The lawyer was calm, collected, a man who had walked through many battles without raising his voice. He greeted me with respect, not pity, and that alone reminded me I was not here as a woman begging for scraps. I took my seat at the end of the table, the same seat where my husband used to sit, and I kept my back straight as if he was right behind me. The room grew quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every breath sound louder. She leaned forward and asked if we could just get it over with, because she had a busy day ahead. Her arrogance hung in the air like a perfume that was too strong, choking everything around it. The lawyer opened the black leather folder and placed a sealed envelope in front of him. I saw her smile twitch just a little, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me to know that a part of her wasn't expecting this. She tried to speak, but he held up his hand, calm and firm, and then he began to read. The words weren't new to me, because I had heard them in my husband's voice a long time ago, but hearing them now, in this room, was like watching the walls they had built against me begin to crack. To my wife, he read slowly, the woman who stood by me when there was nothing but dreams, the woman who built this empire with me, the woman who gave everything without ever asking for more, I leave everything. Every word landed like a stone dropping into still water. Her smile disappeared. She blinked, leaned back slightly, and for the first time since all this began, she had nothing to say. The lawyer continued, reading clause after clause, each one pulling the floor from beneath her carefully built little world. My name was on every line, every title, every property, every account. All of it came back to me with the same quiet force they had used to try and take it away. My son stared at the table, his hands fidgeting, and all are caught between the woman who had whispered poison into his ear and the truth that now wrapped around the room like an iron chain. The lawyer closed the folder with a soft, deliberate sound, then looked directly at her and said she had no legal claim to anything. None of it was hers. Not the house she walked through so proudly, not the company she paraded like a trophy, not the fortune she thought she had stolen. She sat there frozen, her face losing all its practiced sweetness, her confidence draining away like water slipping through her fingers. I didn't say a single word. I didn't need to. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, the same way I did when I built this life piece by piece, and I watched as the woman who thought she owned everything finally realized she had nothing. It was quiet, steady, and it was mine. And for the first time in a long time I breathed without weight on my chest. When I walked out of that room, I didn't rush. I walked the way someone walks through a place they have built with their own hands, with quiet strength in their steps and no need to prove anything to anyone. The air outside felt different, almost lighter, as if the world itself had been holding its breath and was finally letting it out. For weeks, they had made me feel like a stranger in my own life. But in that single moment, everything had shifted. It wasn't just about the money, the houses, or the company. It was about reclaiming the pieces of myself they tried to strip away while smiling to my face. I looked up at the house, the same house where every corner carried the story of my sweat and my husband's laughter. And for the first time, in what felt like forever, it felt like home again. As I walked through the front door, I could almost hear the faint echo of the life that was once mine. I traced my fingers along the walls, remembering the years of work that had brought us here. I thought of the first hammer my husband ever lifted, the first contract we signed, the first floor we built with our own hands. This house wasn't made from luxury or luck. It was made from grit, love, and a kind of faith that doesn't break when tested. She had tried to erase me from my own story, but you cannot erase the one who wrote the first lines. I moved through each room slowly, not like someone inspecting property, but like someone touching a piece of their soul. The smell of the wood, the softness of the old curtains, the quiet creak of the floorboards under my feet, it was all mine again. I didn't need to shout or claim it. It was already a part of me, and it had been waiting patiently for me to come back. Every corner reminded me of who I was long before she ever arrived with her designer smile and hungry hands. I remembered the days when my son was just a little boy, running down the hallways barefoot, When our life was small but honest, when family meant something solid and real. I walked into the main living room and sat in the chair my husband used to love, the one he carved his initials into when we were young and too broke to buy new furniture. I closed my eyes and let the memories roll through me like a warm breeze. The weight I had carried for so long was gone, replaced by something steady, something strong. I realized that even when they had pushed me into the guest house, even when they had drained the accounts and taken my name off papers, they never really owned this place. Because this house, this company, this legacy was made of my hands and his. They could move numbers around on paper, but they couldn't take away what was written in the bones of this home. The locks had already been changed, and she no longer had access to anything. The keys now rested in my palm, warm from my touch, exactly where they belonged. I stood by the window and watched the sun begin to set, its soft orange light slipping across the land like a quiet promise. I felt no bitterness, just the steady calm of someone who has walked through fire and come out still standing. This was my life. This was my story. And after everything they had done to try and erase me, I was still here, standing exactly where I began, only stronger. A few days passed after the lawyer's words stripped everything she thought she owned right out of her hands, and I could feel the air around the house slowly changing. It no longer carried the coldness she brought into it. The walls no longer echoed with her sharp voice, and the floors no longer seemed to shrink beneath my feet. It was as if the house itself was breathing again, like it had been waiting for this moment just as much as I had. I spent my mornings sitting by the window, watching the sun stretch across the yard, holding my cup with steady hands, feeling the kind of peace I thought I might never feel again. But peace has its way of being tested. And that test came quietly one afternoon when I saw him walking down the path to the house. My son stood at the gate for a long moment before opening it, his shoulders slightly hunched, his steps unsure, the confidence he once carried around her, now replaced with something that looked a lot like regret. He came alone this time, without the woman who had spent years weaving poison into the cracks of this family. His hands were empty, and his eyes, once so full of certainty, flickered with something I had not seen in a very long time. I didn't move to meet him at the door. I let him take each step slowly, let him feel the weight of every choice that led him here. When he reached me, he didn't speak at first. He just stood there, and I could see the way his chest rose and fell as if he was trying to gather the right words, but kept finding silence instead. He looked like a man who had just watched the ground crumble beneath him, realizing too late who had laid the foundation in the first place. I kept my hands folded on my lap, steady and calm, waiting for him to find his voice. He whispered my name like he wasn't sure if he had the right to say it anymore. And in that moment, I saw pieces of the boy I raised still hiding somewhere behind the man he had become. He told me he had made mistakes. He said he should have seen what she was doing, that he should have listened to me, that he let himself be led by a woman who cared more about power than the family she was stepping on to get it. His words cracked in the air like glass, small and unsteady, but they didn't come with excuses, and for that, I let them fall where they needed to. I didn't interrupt him, because sometimes silence speaks louder than forgiveness ever could. I sat there, steady as the walls of the house he once abandoned, letting him face what he had helped create. He asked me if there was a way to fix what had been broken. But the truth is, some things are not meant to be swept away with a few soft words. Trust, once cracked, doesn't fit back together the same. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cry, I didn't turn away. I simply told him that love is still love, but it is not blind anymore. That trust is something you earn, not something you inherit. I saw his eyes lower, as if those words landed heavier than anything else I could have said. Then he nodded, not because the hurt had disappeared, but because deep down he knew he had to carry the weight of what he allowed to happen. When he walked away, I didn't feel empty, I felt steady. His apology didn't erase the pain, but it was a start, a quiet ripple in water that had been still for too long. I stood by the doorway watching him go, the wind brushing softly against my face, and for the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't standing in the shadow of what they had done anymore. I was standing in the light of everything I had reclaimed. Some wounds heal slowly, but they do heal, especially when the person carrying them refuses to let bitterness win. And that was something no one could ever take from me. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself waking up earlier than usual, not because I had to, but because the mornings felt different now. The house no longer carried the weight of betrayal in its walls, and the air no longer felt heavy on my chest when I took my first breath of the day. I would sit by the window with the soft light stretching across the floor, holding my cup in my hands, letting the warmth remind me that even after the storm, life has a way of finding its quiet again. I thought a lot during those mornings, not about the money they tried to take or the power they thought they had, but about everything that had led me here, every piece of my life that had been tested, and every lesson the pain had carved into me. I remembered the woman I used to be before any of this happened. The one who believed family was unshakable. The one who trusted too easily. Who thought love alone would keep everything safe. That woman learned the hardest way that love without boundaries can be twisted by the wrong hands. But sitting there, I also realized that I wasn't broken by what happened. I had been bruised, yes, and there were nights when the quiet felt louder than any voice, but I was still standing. I had walked through the kind of betrayal that can hollow a person out, and yet here I was, breathing, whole, stronger than before. Sometimes I would walk through the house just to feel the ground beneath my feet, to remind myself that I wasn't just living in a building, I was living inside a story that I wrote with my own hands. I thought about my husband a lot too. I thought about how he used to say that wealth was not just measured in what you own, but in what you're able to protect. He had seen this storm coming long before I did, and his love for me wasn't just in the years we spent together. It was in the way he made sure I would be safe, even when he wasn't here anymore. That kind of love doesn't fade, it stays hidden in quiet places, waiting for its moment to remind you that you were never truly alone. I learned to make peace with the fact that people change. Sometimes the ones you would have given everything for will turn their backs on you. Not because they needed to, but because they wanted more than they ever deserved. I learned that silence can be stronger than shouting. That standing your ground without raising your voice can shake the people who thought they could destroy you. I also learned that pain doesn't have to turn into hatred. It can turn into strength if you let it. I had spent too long letting their actions shape the way my heart felt, but now I was shaping my own peace again. One evening, I sat outside watching the last light disappear beyond the trees, and I realized that this was the part of the story they would never understand. They thought it was about money, about control, about taking something they thought was theirs. But this story was never theirs to begin with. It was mine. I was the one who built it, I was the one who protected it, and I was the one still here after everything had fallen apart around them. That was something they could never buy, never fake, never steal. It was the quiet truth sitting in my chest, and it was worth more than all the money in the world. As I sit here tonight, I can finally feel the kind of calm that only comes after walking through a long storm. The house is quiet, but it's a good kind of quiet, the kind that wraps around you like a soft blanket, reminding you that strength isn't always loud, it's steady. I look around at everything I built with my own hands, and it no longer feels like something that can be taken away, because it isn't just walls and land, it's years of my life, and no one can steal that. What they thought was their victory turned out to be their undoing, and what they tried to break only made me stronger. I didn't need revenge to win, I just needed to stand still, and let the truth do its work. I've learned that sometimes the people who betray you only teach you how strong you really are. Their greed showed me what silence can do when it carries power, and it reminded me that dignity has a weight no lie can crush. My story isn't about what I lost, it's about what I took back, and in that quiet, I know I've won. Thank you for staying with me till the end of my story. It truly means a lot. I'd love to know where you're watching from, so leave it in the comments, and if this touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you can join me for the next one.